Port of Ipswich has been the centre of trade, both nationally and internationally, since the late 6th century. And although both the port and the town couldn't operate without each other, they also operate quite independently, and they both have their own characters indeed. So we're going to go off and explore. I tell you a little bit about the old and the new as we go. I'm going to pop my sunglasses on because I realise I'm squinting here, and let you know about the Port of Ipswich, which is one of the oldest towns in England. It grew up in the Anglo-Saxon times during the 7th century with King Raywald, and he is said to be the king in the ship's burial ground there. So if you haven't been to Suffolk, definitely worth a visit. So come take a stroll with me. Let's see what we find. This is the front of the university campus, and across the road we can see the newly built Suffolk Archive Office, and they recently did a whole project on Thomas Wolsey which was presented here. To give you some additional history, in the 17th century the port and river were managed by the Ipswich Corporation. Fortunately it wasn't managed correctly and the coffers were misappropriated. So in 1803 a committee was appointed to take over the responsibility of the river. The creation of the wet dock in 1837 significantly altered the port. No longer was a common quay which was situated near the custom house the only place that could be legally unloaded. In 1997 the port was sold to Ipswich Port Limited to Associated British Ports. During the reign of Edward III in 1327 to 77, Ipswich was one of the richest and most important ports in the country. The king was often in Ipswich, more so in 1338. He began assembling his fleets in the Orwell, and prior to raising an expeditionary force at the start of the 100 Years' War with France. During the 1930s and 40s, millions of tons of shipping passed through. The port played a major role during World War II, and post-industrial redevelopment began in the 1990s, and it's lovely to see the waterfront and how it continues to improve today. This is Waterfront House, once home to the Conship Container Shipping Company. This has been renovated into offices. It was originally a 19th century disused grain warehouse, and as you can see it's now being used by Ashton Legal Services. You can see down the side and how well they are repurposing all of these buildings. The town is a lot busier this morning. Just take a look at this lovely building just to see how nicely it has all been restored. It's certainly nice to see all of these buildings being repurposed instead of being torn down. Here we have the Grade 2 listed historic custom house. This was built from 1844 to 1945 from red and white brick and stone, which has given it a special place in history. The building overlooks the wet dock and is now home to the Ipswich Port Authority. The blue doors leading off the quay were once used to take prisoners into the police station, which was situated at the rear of the custom house. The cells are still visible inside the building. This building is actually open to the public and can be visited on Ipswich Heritage Days in September. So it's definitely worth stepping by. Although I have yet to be allowed upstairs, but that's probably because that's a private office. They don't want members of the public there. If we turn around, we can see the Thames sailing barge Victor, and this can often be seen sitting opposite the Custom House. Victor was built in 1895 for work in the linseed trade. She could have been used by John Good and Son back in the day. Victor does day trips, and it's lovely to see these barges still in operation. During the war, she loaded munitions out of Chatham Dock and also survived a bomb. She was eventually restored to carry passengers. As with most progress, the arrival of the railway in 1846 put a challenge in place for seagoing vessels. Ipswich did continue to prosper, however. Here's another view of some of the colourful buildings, and just to show you in the distance, that's where we started our walk in part one. There are a couple of other sailing barges that can be seen here during the summer months. The Thistle and the Hydrogen, and of course the Thalata, which is now moored here since the Manningtree dock has been fenced up, and all of these barges provide day trips. So it's definitely worth checking them out. I have been out on the Thalata for the day and I'd highly recommend it. An interesting fact, until 1939, Australian square riggers would arrive here and carry wheat for the Ipswich flour mills. At that time, the ore well wasn't being dredged in the way it is now, so the sailing barges would meet the vessel at Butterman's Bay near Levington to unload the cargo to bring it into Ipswich. Let's continue along. As we walk along through this quay, you'll be able to see that they have taken some of these historic buildings and repurposing them. Following on from what I was explaining earlier about Edward III in 1327, although the king wasn't in favour with the people of Ipswich, since he placed the temporary granting of Ipswich privileges to Harwich, this was later revoked, by the way. It was during this time large numbers of long barges arrived at the town, and in 1340 the king's fleet of 200 sailing ships arrived and anchored in the estuary. This placed a great strain on the town, who needed to feed and house them, so they were pleased when they set off. The king's fleet routed the French at the Battle of Sluis, dominating the English Channel and preventing French invasion. There has been much speculation that there was once a town called Orwell, however nothing materialised to support it. There was a report of a river called Ure, U-R-E, and that sat on the mouth of a very deep well that mariners were able to see the bottom of, and that was a well, and that's where we're thinking the name Urwell transpired into Orwell came from. This is one of the repurposed grain mills, residential above and restaurants below. This is the Waterfront Bistro, and I have been here for many live events on Sundays. There was also a little restaurant by the side of it, and this is now sadly closed. By the 18th century, silt levels increased so much that shipping not only became very difficult but very dangerous. Ships were being damaged and goods couldn't be unloaded safely. The river commissioners were formed, who gained power to maintain the river between Stockbridge and Levington. By 1842, the wet dock had been opened and Ipswich Harbour became the largest wet dock in Great Britain. This is great for Ipswich as it enjoyed much of the Victorian prosperity. In 1881, an even larger dock opened, and in 1904, almost 800 feet of new quay space was built. So as you can see, walking along here is very rich history, and you may not have realised all this before you. This high-rise apartment block, affectionately known as the Wine Rack, this was another victim of the financial crash of 2007. It sat empty for so long its empty shell resembled a freestanding wine rack, hence the name. The name seems to have stuck, and now even after completion you can see that the building has retained the name. The building here on Albion Wharf, or the Wine Rack as it's affectionately known by the town, stood unfinished over Ipswich, and there was a local developer, John Howard, of Ipswich Wharf Developments. He purchased the building in 2014 with a view of restarting the development period, and working closely with the developer, he undertook extensive work to ensure the concrete frame that had been exposed to the elements for many winters had not been compromised. I will attempt to add a few more historic photos here if I can find some online that are not copyrighted. And this is the old Cranfield Mills building, as quite a difference where they have actually joined those two together. These were acquired by Albion Mills in 1972. Some parts of the mill were then demolished and others were converted into apartments. I just love the look of the old building and the story that it tells of days gone by. We really do need to embrace this side of Ipswich. And as you can see as we go around, there's lots of building and regeneration. I think they've done a fabulous job with this waterfront, and Ipswich Borough Council should be very proud. As we walk along the quay here, past the Wine Rack, you'll be able to see the difference between the old and what the buildings looked like before the developers got their hands on them. I'd like to think that this building that we are approaching is going to be developed, but sadly you can see demolition signs on the outside, which is a shame, but unfortunately we can't keep everything, especially if it's not safe, and certainly if it's not savable. But the steel frame that we're approaching here is absolutely fantastic. Now here's a little treat as we approach the side of this building. This was curated by Ipswich Maritime Trust. It is claimed to be England's only window museum. It was set up in 1982 with the aim to educate people of Suffolk in all matters maritime. I'm just going to go slowly along so that you can take a look. Obviously, it's not going to be as good as if you were here seeing the same thing for yourself. And there is also a note here for the red sail barges and pictures of days gone by in Ipswich. If you have a look closely at some of these photographs, you'll be able to see in the background the Whitmore building, which is something that I referenced earlier when we were talking about the development of the Salthouse Harbour Hotel. Some lovely pictures there of things that have gone on the quay and showing its history. I have placed a photograph of that poster in case you wanted to have a look online for yourself and find out more about this lovely window display. But if you are on Ipswich Quay, it's definitely worth popping by to have a little look at it. We're going to continue down the side alley onto College Street and see if we can take another view of the Cranfield Mills building. The whole waterfront in Ipswich was one of the biggest wet docks in Europe. It unfortunately became run down once the docks were moved out and off to Felixstowe, and Cranfield Mills closed down in 1999. It was founded originally by John Cranfield in 1884 and was extended in 1906 as a 17-storey grain silo, and that was added in the 1950s. Here's another beautiful picture of St Mary at Quay. I'll attempt to add a few historic pictures, but they may be copyrighted. So look at this building. How wonderful is this? Cranfield Mills were acquired by Allied Mills in 1972. Some parts of the mill were then demolished, and others were converted into apartments that we see here. I do love looking at these old buildings, and they tell such a great story. I wish I could have a wander round inside. Look at the big doorways that would have been used for unloading. I'm going to take a little wander. This is Quay Street, and it now becomes College Street. Across the road here on our right is Burton and Sons and Sanders Limited. They were manufacturers of cake and bakery ingredients and cake decorations for the catering industry. And this is also a Grade 2 listed building. It appears to be slated to become apartments, as there was scaffold erected here in 2014. However, nothing appears to have progressed here. They have tarps on the roof, so it does look as though there may be a little bit of water ingress. The fortunate thing about this is that it cannot be demolished, which is good to know. So it will be made into some use at some point. Burton's also had the large factory on Albion Wharf, and this was the Burtons of wagon wheel fame. Who didn't have a wagon wheel when they were a kid? Across the road here is Wolsey's Gate. Definitely worth a visit. And sadly, all that remains of Wolsey's college dreams. I'll take a few pictures and add them so that you can see more detail. It has been given its routine conservation check, and as good as it can be for something that's hundreds of years old and has suffered much erosion, wear and tear. The brickwork is worth a look, as it's an abstract art, and the stone coat of arms of Henry VIII. How much detail we'll get to see on that, I don't know. This was the entrance to Wolsey's College. The wall was created to encompass St Peter's, as you can see very close by, as the chapel for the college. It was registered as an ancient monument, and there is a wall visible from behind the Burton's car park up to the church, which we'll go and see if we can have a look for on the way back. Along here, where you can see this lovely sort of terracotta coloured building, opposite Wolsey's Gate is number 4 College Street. There has been much surmised that this building was once a pub. I'm actually going to cross over so I can show you the beauty of this. Now, apart from it being surmised that it was a pub, there is actually no evidence to support this. There are pictures which I will find. I'm sure someone's posted them on the internet. The state of disrepair it was in for very many years, and I used to drive by here seeing it in its sorry state and hoping that somebody would lovingly restore this building, because it takes somebody special with very deep pockets and a love of our history to actually put this right. This house would have originally been a corner shop, and it had its jettied first floor, as most of these buildings did. It drew significant crowds on Heritage Day when it was opened, and unfortunately I didn't know it was on the list, and I was in Felixstowe at that time, which is a shame. But if it's open again this September, I'll definitely be joining that line. You can see there is a beautiful Bessemer beam above. Look at the detail in that, and it's been lovely restored. So my height. Unfortunately, the gates are locked, which I completely understand. So I'm unable to get round this side. But I will walk down past Cranfield Mills and have a look just to see if it did say there was access, but considering there are signs that say dangerous building and there's a fence holding around it, I doubt very much if we'll get in. Plus it looks to be flooded as well. Yeah, there's a fence holding all the way around. I'm going to tiptoe around the puddle just to see if I can have a view around the back. Okay, I see what they mean by the wall. I'll just zoom to see if you can see the wall at the back of the church there. That's what's left of the parts of Wolsey's College. Just having a look around the back of that building that we saw off of the quay that was slated for demolition. You can see that some of the floors have been removed, no doubt to make way for this high rise, the mill, which is by the side of it. We are going to make our way now along the quay here, taking in all this fabulous architecture, and we're going to head towards Stoke Bridge. These buildings are so beautiful and have such a rich history. Along here is the Jarwood Dance Studio, home of the region's leading dance organisation, Dance East. It offers a wide array of dance and fitness options. It's situated on the ground floor of the 23-storey building, The Mill, which is one of East Anglia's tallest buildings. The mill is the first phase of the Cranford Mills development at Albion Quay. The development here cost £42 million and it holds 300 apartments. The development came to a halt in the bank crash of 2007 and sat untouched for several years until financial recovery. It was formerly Cranfield Towers, now affectionately called The Mill. There is an interesting fact. There is a custom-built peregrine nesting box set within the parapet of the mill, and that's 230 feet above the waterfront, and that was set by the Suffolk ornithologist group to entice wild falcons back to Suffolk after a 200-year absence. There is also a very popular nesting box 140 feet up on Orwell Bridge, but I certainly wouldn't recommend going up there to look for it. Stoke Bridge is also affectionately known as Stoke Crossing. It was here in 907 King Edgar granted the whole of Stoke Parish to the monks of Ely. I'm just going to stop here while I'm speaking and let you take some of this in. This is the grant that was issued, was used for Ipswich, which was the early name for Ipswich, as we've already covered. Stoke is the Saxon word for stockade, and the South Bank parish predates the Saxon era, which is a fortified hill protected by water and marshes. And it was right here that marks the earliest river crossing between the north and south. Here were the shallowest place for a ford And the earliest place a bridge is to have existed, that would have been as early as AD 970. How cool is that? And I will include any photos I can on the video. This served as trade and communication routes. At the time the river would have been much wider and it would have been stretching from the Old Bell Inn, which you can probably just see ahead of you while we're zooming. So you can see it. And I am going to pan around again to show you, because the river would have stretched from the Old Bell Inn down to St. Peter's Church. So you can see there's not much distance to the bridge. And there would have been wooden keys staked out in the mud. So Ipswich would have been repeatedly extended and embanked to encourage moorings. The bridge of the 9th century, I'm going to go up and look. Across, taking in some of the old architecture there. The bridge of the 10th century lined the Saxon roads of Lower Brook Street and Great Whip Street, Great Whip Street being further along down here. And the ford was continually used for heavy vehicles. Long after the construction of the bridge, it was actually ordered in 1477. And from that order, no carts were allowed to go across that bridge. The bailiffs kept it locked, and in 1835, John of Caldwell to build a bridge. Those using it paid a toll. It's not known if Caldwell built the bridge, however a toll bridge was put in place on this site. In 1818, the stone bridge that was built here was actually washed away in a flood, and in 1819 Cubitt, a civil engineer, asked for an estimate to replace the bridge, and he apparently gave two suggestions, and they were put forward at $3,500 for a brick one or $3,850 for a cast iron, and the local authority decided to go with the iron. And just as another interesting fact, while the road is quiet, I'll just show down here. Unfortunately you can't see the Novotel sign, but I'll try and zoom in to show it to you. It's behind that tree, unfortunately. But just where the Novotel, which is across from St. Peter's Church, there was evidence of the earliest days of Ipswich. There were wells found there, and they were lined with barrels from Germany, and these were carbon dated to the 6th century, along with Frankish pottery. There was also a water mill here, that harnessed the power of the river, and this was also where the Riot Act was put in place in the 1800s, when the townspeople were driven to such desperation over food prices. And I think we may have a little bit of that going on now. Food prices keep climbing. Ahead of us is the old Bell Inn that we just saw, and this is a 16th century pub, and it was said to be one of the oldest in the town, but it is no longer a pub, it is now a funeral directors, and it is compared to Manning's, but Manning's is actually still in operation. This was said to be a much bigger building. Some of it was demolished to make way when Vernon Street was widened, and at that time it was called the Silver Star, and it's a cobbled inn, and that's still very much visible. We're going to continue now back down the quay, and I'll focus on a couple of the old industrial buildings on the opposite side of the river, one being Fryson's, which was also taken over. They were quite prominent. I do cover that in a different walk, and the Phelan Maltings, which I pointed out earlier, which have now been synthetically restored into an office complex. Just as an aside, and I'll try and include some photographs that I'd taken earlier, the corner post on the old Bell Inn features a bell with a clapper and a cat-like creature whose back end is like a circle, and there have been suggestions that this could be likened to the nursery rhyme Ding Dong Dell, Pussy's down the well, and that corner post was carved in the 19th century by renowned wood carver Mr. Ringham. And of course I'll cover that more in our Lost Pubs walk in more detail. So this is the Edward Fyson building. You can still see the ghost of the sign on the building there. I do love to look at the ghost signs. This is the other side of the river, and it has been split. I can show you both sides, and that leads down to Haven Marina and the port of Ipswich. I'll just have a little wander down here to give you a decent view. There we will only be able to go so far because, as I said, it is the port of Ipswich. Ahead you can see the buildings that are wrapped in the plastic sheeting, and that's where we started our walk today. So very much different from previous walks where we've seen lots of historic buildings and covered lots more facts. Equally important, as I said at the beginning, very much important for Ipswich, particularly before the railway came along, and it still provides for Ipswich in many different ways because we've developed this waterfront now, and it's a marina, it's a place for restaurants, it's a place for nightlife, There's lots of live music. So still very much alive, but in a very different way and more suitable for today. So ahead there, Phelan Maltings, as we saw from the other side. Beautiful old wooden jetty there. I'm just going to pan back around so you can see it in all its glory. And it looks as though it's going to rain. So I'm going to look at ending our walk here, where we've seen the juxtaposition of old and new in Ipswich, sympathetic restoration. We can see so much of how life is lived today. Lots of apartments, old mills being repurposed. It's always great to see. If you have enjoyed the walk today, as I said, I know it's very different, but that's all part of exploring. If you have enjoyed it, please leave me a like. Take the time to subscribe, that way anytime any other walks are up you'll get to see them. It's always nice to go out for a stroll. Hopefully I get back to my car before the sky opens up. Seems to have been a few really dodgy days of late. It's been really lovely spending this time with you. Hope you've enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing you again.